What happens when a ghost becomes a person? For 10 years, Amelia Davenport was a ghost in her own life, an invisible wife to the billionaire titan, Arthur Davenport. She was the quiet shadow at his side, the polite nod at his gallus, the woman he hadn't truly seen in a decade. But tonight, at the most exclusive party of the year, surrounded by New York's elite, the ghost is about to show everyone what she's made of. Arthur ignored his wife for the last time, and in the next few hours, she would become the only person in the room he couldn't ignore. The morning sun sliced across the Italian marble floor of the Park Avenue penthouse, illuminating dust motes dancing in the sterile, silent air. The apartment, occupying the entire 80th floor, had panoramic views of Central Park, but Amelia Davenport only ever saw the reflection of her own gilded cage. Across the vast 10-foot slab of black granite that served as a breakfast table, Arthur Davenport, her husband, was not eating. He was, as always, consuming information, his steel blue eyes scanning the Wall Street Journal on one tablet while a Forbes article glowed on another. "Amelia," he said, not looking up. His voice was a low baritone, the kind that sealed billion-dollar deals and dismissed subordinates. "The car will be here at 7 for the Morgan Gala. Don't be late." Amelia stirred her lukewarm tea. "Good morning to you too, Arthur." He finally glanced up, his gaze flicking over her, taking in the simple cashmere lounge set, the hair pulled back, the absence of jewelry, and dismissed her just as quickly. "Wear the sapphires. The Cartier set from the Geneva trip. The Minister of Finance will be there, and I want his wife to see them." He wants her to see the jewelry, not me, Amelia thought, the familiar, cold ache settling in her chest. She was a mannequin, a walking display case for his wealth. "Of course," she murmured. Arthur's phone buzzed, a sharp, angry sound. He snatched it up. "What? No, Shaw can't have that bid. I want the waterfront property. I don't care what you have to pay. Liquidate the transport stocks if you have to. Just get it done." He listened, his jaw tightening. "And find out who this AH Capital is. They've been a thorn in my side for 6 months. They outbid us on the Apex building and the biotech patent. They're too smart, too fast. Find them. I want to know everything." He snapped the phone shut and threw it on the table. He saw Amelia watching him, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "What is it?" "Nothing, Arthur. Just, you seem stressed about this AH Capital." He let out a short, barking laugh. "Stressed? I'm not stressed. I'm annoyed. It's some ghost, some hedge fund brat playing with his inheritance. They're a nuisance, not a threat. You wouldn't understand the pressure, Amelia. Your days are simpler." He gestured vaguely, as if to encompass her entire life. The charity committees, the garden club, the little fund she managed. That little fund, as he called it, was the Isabel Hayes Foundation, an inheritance from her godmother that he'd never once asked about. He assumed it was for buying flowers for hospital lobbies. "Yes," Amelia said, her voice perfectly neutral. "Very simple." "Good. Now, about tonight." He stood, straightening his bespoke Brioni suit jacket. "The centerpiece of the gala is the auction. They're selling the original Hudson shipping charter, the 1790 document. It's a piece of New York history. I want it." "Why?" Amelia asked, genuinely curious. Arthur looked at her, as if she'd asked why he needed oxygen. "Why?" "Because it's legacy, Amelia. It's the cornerstone of American commerce. It belongs in the lobby of Davenport Tower. It's a symbol. A symbol of what? Of power, of permanence. Gregory Shaw wants it. Victoria Sterling will probably bid just to annoy me. But I will have it." He walked over and, in a rare gesture, touched her shoulder. The touch was cold, proprietary. Just smile tonight, Amelia. Look engaged. Don't wander off. And for God's sake, wear the sapphires. He left. The heavy penthouse door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the vast, empty room. Amelia sat alone, the park glittering below her like a carpet of jewels. She picked up her own phone, a simple device he never bothered to check. She opened an app, one hidden inside a folder marked Garden Plots. The screen lit up, not with flowers, but with the neon green and red of real-time stock tickers and secure messages. A text from her chief analyst read, "Davenport Holdings is liquidating transport. It's the move we predicted. Are we ready to acquire?" Amelia typed a reply. "Not yet. Wait for the dip. And regarding the Morgan Gala auction tonight, ensure our paddle is registered. Number 77. I'll be handling this one, personally." She closed the app, took a sip of her cold tea, and looked at her faint reflection in the black granite. "A simple life," she whispered. "We'll see." 10 years ago, Amelia Hayes had been a different person. She was a junior curator at the New York Historical Society, brilliant, passionate, and invisible in a different way. She was the researcher in the back room, the one who found the provenance, the one who lived in a tiny, book-filled apartment in the West Village. She met Arthur Davenport at a benefactor's dinner. He wasn't interested in the exhibit. He was there to network. But she had spoken for 2 minutes about a 19th century landscape, and he had been captivated, not by her, but by her poise. He saw her as a potential acquisition. She was elegant, educated, and most importantly, quiet. She came from good stock, but had no powerful family of her own, no competing empire. She would not challenge him. Their courtship was a series of scheduled appearances. Their proposal was a line item in his 5-year plan. "Amelia," he'd said over a $500 steak at Peter Luger, "we make a good team. Marrying me will provide you with a life you deserve." A platform. She, naive and tired of being overlooked, had mistaken platform for partnership. The illusion shattered within 6 months. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a possession, a first lady for his corporate kingdom. Her opinions on art were quaint. Her desire to work was unnecessary. He moved her from her beloved, cramped apartment to the sterile, high-altitude penthouse. He replaced her tweed blazers with Chanel and her research papers with seating charts. Then, 2 years into the marriage, her godmother, Isabel Hayes, passed away. Isabel had been the black sheep, a brilliant, eccentric woman who'd been a very early-stage investor in a dozen obscure Silicon Valley startups in the late 1990s. Amelia and Arthur sat in a stuffy lawyer's office on Wall Street. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Hemlock, read the will. After a few minor bequests, he came to the main one. "And the remainder of my estate," Hemlock read, adjusting his glasses, "including all holdings in the IH Tech portfolio, I leave to my goddaughter, Amelia Hayes Davenport. The current valuation is, well, this seems correct, approximately $940 million. Amelia's breath caught. Arthur beside her actually chuckled. "My apologies, Mr. Hemlock," Arthur said, patronizing. "Did you say 900 million? Isabel was a lovely woman, but she lived in a 1-bedroom in Palo Alto." "The woman," Mr. Hemlock said dryly, "was one of the primary investors in 3 separate unicorn tech companies that went public. The portfolio is liquid, diversified, and managed by Goldman Sachs. The number is correct. 940 million. Plus change." On the limousine ride home, Arthur had patted her hand. "Well, well. A nice little nest egg, Amelia. A little surprise. Good for you." He immediately began to discuss how they could leverage it, folding it into his own holding company. "We'll put it to good use," he'd said. "A new wing for the museum, perhaps. We'll put your name on it." That was the moment the ghost found her resolve. "No, Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I don't think so." "What?" "It was left to me, I think. I'll manage it myself, for my little charities, as you say." He had been so stunned by her refusal that he'd simply laughed it off. "Manage it? Amelia, darling, managing a portfolio like that isn't like managing a garden party. It's blood sport. Don't worry your pretty head. Have your broker send the paperwork to my CFO." "I won't be doing that," she said. He'd been furious for a week, but his own ego was his blind spot. He truly believed she was incapable. He dismissed it, assuming she'd get bored and hand it over, or that her little fund would bleed out in a year. He never asked again. He never checked. He had no idea she'd spent the last 8 years not just managing it, but growing it. She'd done what she did best. She researched. She studied. She spent her simple days in her home office, the one he never entered, becoming an expert. She was quiet, but she was not idle. She hired the best analysts Goldman had, not under the Davenport name, but under her maiden name. She formed AH Capital. She turned $940 million into a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. She bought distressed assets. She invested in green tech. She was the ghost the Wall Street Journal was writing about, the anonymous player who was too smart, too fast. Arthur was right. It was blood sport, and she was a natural predator. Tonight at the gala, she was wearing the Cartier sapphires, just as he'd asked. But the earrings felt different. They no longer felt like a leash. They felt like armor. The Morgan Library and Museum was a fortress of Gilded Age splendor. Its McKim, Mead and White architecture, a testament to old money and intellectual power. Tonight it was flooded with the new. Limousines, from Rolls-Royce Phantoms to electric Lucid Airs, deposited the 1% onto the illuminated pavement of Madison Avenue. When Arthur and Amelia Davenport arrived, the flashbulbs were blinding. Arthur soaked them in, one hand possessively on Amelia's lower back, steering her like a prized vehicle. He was magnificent in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, a Patek Philippe 157G glittering on his wrist. Amelia, as requested, wore the sapphires. They were staggering, a necklace of deep, cornflower blue stones, surrounded by a constellation of diamonds with matching earrings. Her gown was a custom Oscar de la Renta, a deep midnight blue that made her skin look like porcelain. She was, by any measure, breathtaking. But no one saw her. They saw the sapphires, the dress, and the man she was attached to. "Arthur, marvelous!" A rival billionaire, Gregory Shaw, bellowed, clapping Arthur on the back. His eyes flicked to Amelia. "Mrs. Davenport? Lovely." He didn't wait for a reply, immediately turning back to Arthur. "Big night, eh? That charter. Hope you brought your checkbook, old man." "It'll be mine before the night is out, Greg," Arthur replied, his voice a confident rumble. He then spotted the Minister of Finance and, with a quick squeeze of Amelia's arm, said, "Go get us some champagne. Mingle." He was gone. Mingle. The word was a joke. Mingling for her was an exercise in polite invisibility. She was Mrs. Davenport, a title, not a person. She procured a glass of Dom Perignon from a passing waiter and stood near one of the massive tapestry-hung walls, watching the room. It was a sea of power. Tech CEOs from Silicon Valley chatted with oil barons from Texas. Senators discreetly high-fived hedge fund managers. And then Victoria Sterling glided over. Victoria was everything Amelia was not. Loud, blonde, sharp-edged, and dripping in Bulgari Serpenti diamonds. She ran her father's media empire and was known for her brutal corporate takeovers and even more brutal social commentary. She had always treated Amelia with a particularly venomous condescension. "Amelia, darling," Victoria purred, air kissing the space near Amelia's cheek. "You came, and you're wearing the Cartier. Arthur must be so proud. They're almost as big as the ones he bought his, last protégé. You remember? The one from the ballet?" It was a low, deliberate blow, a reference to a rumor from 2 years prior. Amelia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold as ice. "Victoria," Amelia said, her voice as smooth as silk. "What a stunning Givenchy. It's almost identical to the one I saw in last season's archives. It's so brave of you to be vintage adjacent." Victoria's painted smile twitched. She had been hit, and she knew it. "Well," Victoria recovered, taking a sip of her own champagne, "I'm just thrilled to be here. The auction is going to be divine. I heard Arthur wants the Hudson Charter. It'll look perfect in his new building. He always did have a flair for collecting expensive old paper." "He does enjoy his symbols," Amelia agreed. "He's all action, isn't he?" Victoria's eyes scanned the room, landing on Arthur, who was laughing boisterously. "That's what I admire. Power. Real, tangible power. Not everyone is built for it. Some people are just built to decorate." She let the insult hang in the air, then smiled brightly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, darling, I see someone important. Try not to get lost in the curtains." Victoria swept away, leaving Amelia in her wake. Amelia took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne. The bubbles burst on her tongue. Decorate. Expensive old paper. She looked across the magnificent, vaulted atrium. She saw Arthur, holding court, basking in the light. She saw Victoria, laughing, her head thrown back. She saw Gregory Shaw posturing. They were all so loud, so convinced of their own importance. A waiter walked by. Amelia placed her untouched glass on his tray. She glanced at her own Patek Philippe, a simple, elegant Calatrava he'd never noticed she owned. It was 8:45 p.m. The auctioneer, Julian Croft, was tapping the microphone on the podium at the front of the room. He was a distinguished man from Sotheby's, known for his wit and his ability to coax millions from tight-fisted billionaires. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed, "if you would please take your seats. The auction is about to begin." Amelia did not take the seat reserved for her at Arthur's table. Instead, she moved. She slipped through the crowd to a small, reserved alcove table near the back of the room. It was slightly shadowed, offering a clear view of the stage, but difficult to see from the stage. Waiting on the table was a small, black-lacquered sign. It read, "Reserved," and next to it, resting on the white linen, was a single, discreet bidding paddle. Number 77. The room settled into a hushed anticipation. The first few items went quickly. A week on a private island, a custom Rolls-Royce, a walk-on role in a blockbuster movie. The bids were high, the applause polite. This was the appetizer. Then Julian Croft's demeanor shifted. The lights dimmed slightly, and a single, temperature-controlled glass case was wheeled to the center of the stage. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a single sheet of vellum, covered in elegant, faded script. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," Julian said, his voice dropping to a reverent hush, "the item we have all been waiting for. The original 1790 Hudson Shipping Company Charter. This document, this is New York. This charter, signed by Alexander Hamilton himself, financed the first trade routes that would make this city the capital of the world. It is quite simply the birth certificate of American commerce." A murmur went through the crowd. "It is a piece of history," Julian continued. "A symbol, if you will, of vision, of legacy, and of power. He looked directly at Arthur Davenport's table. "We will open the bidding for this priceless artifact at $5 million. Arthur's hand went up immediately. "$5 million, he said, his voice projecting easily across the room. "I have $5 million from Mr. Davenport," Julian acknowledged. $7 million, Gregory Shaw called out from 2 tables over. "8, snapped Victoria Sterling, flashing a brilliant, competitive smile at Arthur. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to make him pay. $10 million, Arthur said, his voice flat, bored. He was ending this. $10 million from Mr. Davenport. Do I hear 12? Victoria, looking pleased, let it go. Gregory Shaw, however, leaned forward. $12 million. 15, Arthur said instantly, without blinking. He picked up his water glass, a signal of casual dominance. 15 million, Julian said, his eyes scanning. A remarkable sum. 15 million going once, going twice. A hand went up in the back of the room, a hand holding paddle number 77. "I have 16 million, Julian announced, a note of surprise in his voice. 16 million from the holder of paddle 77. Arthur, who had been about to take a sip of water, paused. He looked around, frowning. Who was it? He couldn't see the alcove clearly. He assumed it was an agent for a Saudi prince or a new tech baron from Austin. A nuisance. 20 million, Arthur declared, raising his voice. The alcove was silent for a beat. Then, paddle 77 went up again. 21 million, Julian said, his voice gaining excitement. Arthur's jaw tightened. 25, paddle 77. 26. The room was now dead quiet. This was no longer a polite auction. It was a duel. The pretense of charity was gone. This was about ego. $30 million, Arthur said, his voice like granite. He was standing now. He stared toward the back of the room, trying to pierce the shadows. Let's finish this. The entire room turned to look at the alcove. Paddle 77 rose again, slowly, deliberately. 31 million, Julian said, his voice practically singing. The bid is 31 million. Who the hell is that? Arthur hissed to his table. No one knew. 31 million. Going once. 35, Arthur roared. A collective gasp went through the room. The price was now astronomical, far beyond the document's historical value. This was purely personal. Arthur was red-faced, breathing heavily. He was the king. He would not be challenged by some ghost in the shadows. He stared, waiting for the paddle. It did not go up. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. He had won. He had broken them. 35 million, Julian Croft said, his eyes on the alcove. Going once, going twice. The paddle went up. 36 million. Arthur looked as if he'd been slapped. You. He was speechless. Arthur, his CFO, seated beside him, whispered, That's well over the agreed valuation. Let it go. I will not, Arthur seethed. He was trapped. If he backed down now, in front of Gregory Shaw, in front of Victoria, in front of everyone, he would look weak. He was being toyed with. 40 million, Arthur said. His voice was hoarse. 40 million dollars. He had thrown down the gauntlet. He was daring them to cross it. The room held its breath. Paddle 77 went up. 41 million, Julian said, almost gently. 42, Arthur stammered. Paddle 77. 43. 44, paddle 77. 45. Arthur Davenport stood there, his hands clenched into white fists on the table. He looked at Gregory Shaw, who was watching with undisguised amusement. He looked at Victoria Sterling, whose mouth was a perfect O of shock. He was beaten. He knew it. The ghost in the shadows had deeper pockets, or bigger nerve, than he did. He slumped back into his chair, a sharp, defeated gesture. Done. The silence was deafening. Julian Croft let the moment hang, then raised his gavel. $45 million. Going once, going twice. Sold. For $45 million to the holder of paddle number 77. The room erupted in applause. Arthur sat, frozen, his face a mask of white-hot rage and humiliation. "Who is it?" he demanded to the room at large. "Who is paddle 77? The applause continued, a rolling wave of thunder in the grand hall. Arthur Davenport remained seated, his knuckles white on the table. He was a man who defined his world by winning and losing, and he had just lost, spectacularly and publicly, to an unknown. His eyes were fixed on the back of the room, on the shadowed alcove where his conqueror sat. "A new record," Julian Croft announced, beaming from the stage. "A truly historic moment for the Morgan, and a stunning show of philanthropy. The room is buzzing. Everyone wants to know. Who is this incredibly generous and decisive bidder?" Arthur pushed his chair back, ready to stand, to walk back there and confront whoever it was. He didn't care about decorum. He needed to see the face of the person who had just humiliated him. "And I have wonderful news," Julian continued, raising a hand to quiet the room. "The winning bidder is not an anonymous proxy or a foreign fund. In fact, they are someone you all know, or perhaps someone you think you know." A spotlight, bright and piercing, suddenly snapped on. It didn't point to the alcove. It pointed to the front of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian said, "the winning bidder, the principal of the firm that just secured the Hudson Charter for $45 million, is the founder of A.H. Capital." Arthur froze. A.H. Capital. The name was a thunderclap. His secret rival, the ghost that had been thwarting his company for months. He scanned the crowd wildly. "Where are they? Show me this A.H." "Please, would you join me on stage?" Julian asked, extending a hand. And from the alcove a figure emerged. The figure moved with an unhurried, impossible grace. The spotlight followed her as she walked from the shadows, past the tables of gawking billionaires, toward the stage. It was a woman. She was wearing a midnight blue Oscar de la Renta gown. She was wearing the Cartier sapphires. It was Amelia. Time stopped. The only sound in the cavernous hall was the click of her heels on the marble floor. Victoria Sterling, who had been raising a champagne flute to her lips, froze. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound exploding into the silence. Gregory Shaw's jaw was slack. Arthur Davenport did not move. He simply stared, his brain refusing to process the image. This was a joke, a prank. It was impossible. This was Amelia, his wife, his quiet, simple, decorative wife. She reached the stage and took Julian Croft's offered hand, stepping up to the podium. She stood there for a moment, bathed in the white light, looking out at the sea of stunned, famous, powerful faces. She looked, for all the world, like she belonged there. Julian, clearly in on the secret and relishing the drama, handed her the microphone. "Amelia?" Arthur's voice cracked. It was a pathetic, small sound. "Amelia, what is this? What in God's name are you doing? Get off the stage!" Amelia's eyes found his across the room. She held his gaze. Her expression was not triumphant, not angry. It was calm. It was the look of a CEO about to address her board. She tapped the microphone. A soft thump echoed through the speakers. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was clear, steady, and amplified. It was the same voice she used to ask him if he wanted coffee, but now it held an authority that chilled the blood. "For 6 months," Amelia began, her voice resonating with a clarity that no one in that room had ever heard from her. "Many of you have been wondering about a new player in the market, a firm called A.H. Capital." She paused, letting the name hang in the air. Arthur was trying to stand, but his legs seemed to have forgotten how. A.H. Capital, Amelia continued, was responsible for the acquisition of the Apex building, the one Mr. Shaw. She nodded politely at Gregory, who flinched, was so certain he had secured. We were also the firm that acquired the patents for the K-Biotech firm, a move the Wall Street Journal called aggressively brilliant. She smiled, a small, tight smile. I've been called a ghost, a nuisance, a hedge fund brat. The truth is far simpler. Her eyes locked back onto Arthur's. His face was a canvas of white-hot confusion and dawning horror. A.H. stands for Amelia Hayes, she said. My name. The name I was born with. A.H. Capital is my firm. I am the principal. I am the founder. And I am the CEO. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so total that you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every eye was on Amelia, and then, like a flock of birds turning in unison, every eye swiveled to Arthur. He was exposed. His humiliation was a physical thing, a raw, gaping wound laid bare for his rivals, his friends, and his enemies to see. But how? Arthur whispered. It was all he could manage. The money. Your little fund. My little fund? Amelia's voice had a sudden, sharp edge. You mean the inheritance from my godmother Isabel? The nest egg you told me not to worry my pretty head about? The one you dismissed as flower money? She let his own words hang him. You, Arthur, taught me a valuable lesson, she said, her voice softening, which was somehow more terrifying. You taught me that in your world, you are either a shark or you are chum. You taught me that power is the only thing men like you respect. You taught me that legacy is the only game worth playing. You were so busy looking for rivals on your own level, you never, ever thought to look beside you. She walked to the glass case containing the Hudson Charter. She placed a hand on it. Arthur wanted this charter for his lobby, she announced to the crowd. A symbol, he called it. A trophy to gather dust and impress investors. He believes history is something you own. She turned back to the audience. I believe history is something you share. Which is why, she looked at Julian, who nodded. I, on behalf of A.H. Capital, will not be taking possession of this document. What? Arthur finally found his voice. You're giving it to me. He looked confused, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Amelia's gaze was withering. It was the look a scientist gives a failed experiment. No, Arthur, she said. I'm donating it. Tonight, it will be given to the New York Historical Society, where I used to work, where it can be studied, preserved, and seen by the public, where it belongs. A second wave of gasps, this one followed by a spontaneous, thunderous wave of applause. This wasn't just a power move, it was a class move. She hadn't just outbid him, she'd outclassed him. She had turned his symbol of permanence into a monument to his own irrelevance. Victoria Sterling was as white as the tablecloth. Gregory Shaw was actually smiling, a smile of pure, unadulterated respect for the woman who had just checkmated the king. Amelia looked one last time at her husband. He was no longer the Titan. He was just a man, an old, angry, and very, very small man. You see, Arthur, she said, her voice now quiet, just for him, but still carried by the microphone. You were right. My life was simple. It gave me so much time to think, to plan, to build. She set the microphone down on the podium. She nodded once to Julian Croft. Thank you all for a lovely evening, she said. And with that, Amelia Hayes Davenport, CEO of A.H. Capital, turned and walked off the stage, leaving her husband alone in the wreckage of the world he had built. Amelia did not return to the table. She did not look back. She walked with a straight spine and a steady pace, not towards the exit, but towards the museum's main rotunda, where the director of the New York Historical Society was standing, his face a picture of ecstatic disbelief. She went to him and shook his hand. Behind her, the party had fractured. The applause for her donation died down, replaced by a furious, electric buzzing of whispers. No one was looking at the stage anymore. All 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on one person, Arthur Davenport. He sat motionless, paralyzed. The spotlight on the stage had been turned off, but he felt as if 1,000 suns were burning him. He could hear the whispers. His own wife! A H, capital, all this time. 45 million, just to donate it. My God. Did you see his face? She called it flower money. Victoria Sterling, recovering her composure, glided past his table. She didn't stop, but she leaned in close enough for him to hear her acid whisper. It seems, Arthur, you weren't just outbid. You were outmanaged. And at home, of all places. Gregory Shaw walked by, paused, and clapped Arthur on the shoulder. It wasn't a friendly gesture, it was a commiseration. Tough break, Davenport. Seems the real shark in your family, wasn't you? Arthur's CFO was trying to talk to him. Sir, Mr. Davenport, what are your instructions? The press is going to be a nightmare. Arthur heard nothing. He was replaying the last 10 years, every dismissal, every patronizing pat on the hand, every time he'd told her she wouldn't understand. He saw her in her study, the room he'd always thought was for her gardening correspondence, and he realized with dawning, icy horror that she had been running a multi-billion-dollar empire from a room 50 feet away from his own. He had been so obsessed with the ghosts in the market, he never realized the most dangerous person in his world was the one who slept next to him. She hadn't just built a fortune, she had done it in his shadow, using the very invisibility he had forced upon her as her greatest weapon. He finally, slowly, got to his feet. The room quieted again, watching him. He straightened his Tom Ford jacket, pulling at the lapels. He tried to muster the arrogance, the authority that had defined his entire life. It was gone. He was hollow. He looked for Amelia. She was by the grand staircase, speaking with the Minister of Finance, the very man he'd wanted to impress. The minister was not looking at her sapphires. He was listening to her with rapt, undivided attention, nodding eagerly. As Arthur watched, the minister laughed at something she said and shook her hand vigorously. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. It was a smile he hadn't seen in a decade. She had done more than stun the party. She had rewritten the narrative. She was no longer Mrs. Davenport, the invisible wife. He was now Mr. Davenport, the invisible husband. He began to walk towards the exit, not quickly, but like a man walking through deep water. No one spoke to him. No one met his eye. The crowd parted for him, a silent, damning courtesy. He pushed open the heavy bronze doors and stepped out into the cold November night. The air was sharp, biting. He heard the door click shut behind him. He was alone. Inside, the party was roaring back to life, louder than before. But now, it had a new center of gravity, a new sun. And everyone, from the waiters to the billionaires, was orbiting around Amelia. Arthur Davenport, the man who owned half of New York, stood on the curb on Madison Avenue, ignored by the city he claimed to rule, waiting for a car that, for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure would even come for him. The storm had arrived, and he was on the outside, looking in. Arthur Davenport did not remember the walk from the curb into his limousine. He moved in a state of suspended animation, a vacuum where the roar of his own ego had always been. The city lights of New York, usually a testament to his domain, blurred past the tinted windows like taunting smears of neon. His driver, Thomas, a man who had been with him for 15 years, a man whose children's private school tuitions Arthur paid without a second thought, didn't speak. He merely held the door, his face a perfect, professional mask. But his silence was different. It was not deferential. It was observational. Arthur, for the first time in his life, felt like a specimen. He sat on the plush leather, the limousine's interior suddenly feeling cavernous and cold. His phone, which he had left in the car, was on the center console. It was not ringing. He realized with a chill that no one would be brave enough to call him. They would be texting, emailing, tweeting. They would be dissecting him. He picked it up. The screen was a blinding cascade of notifications. Bloomberg, Reuters, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, even the New York Post. Gallagheddon, Davenport outbid, outed by secret CEO wife in 45 minutos auction stunner. Meet Amelia Hayes, the ghost of AH Capital who haunted Wall Street, from her own penthouse. Davenport Holdings, DVPT, futures plummet, 12% in after hours, trading amidst revelation of spousal competitor. The last one sucked the air from his lungs. 12%. This wasn't just social embarrassment. This wasn't just marital strife. This was a catastrophic financial event. This was war. She wasn't just playing, he realized, his blood running cold. She wasn't just getting revenge. All the pieces, all the nuisances of the last 6 months clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid. AH Capital. The Apex building. He had been so sure he'd had it. The K-Biotech patents, his team had been blindsided. He remembered his conversation just that morning. They're too smart, too fast. And she had been sitting right there, stirring her tea. He thought of her question. A symbol of what? He had answered. Of power. Of permanence. He had been wrong. Tonight, the symbol was of his own spectacular, public implosion. The limousine pulled into the private, subterranean garage of his building. The doorman, Miguel, who usually greeted him with a broad smile, and "Good evening, Mr. Davenport," simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the marble floor. The humiliation was total, seeping down from the gala's stratosphere to the very foundations of his home. He rode the private elevator, the mirrored walls showing him a stranger, a pale, haggard man whose bespoke tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume, ill-fitting and absurd. The penthouse door opened with a soft whoosh. "Amelia," he called out. The apartment was dark, silent. The vast, floor-to-ceiling windows showed the glittering city, a kingdom that was no longer his. She wasn't here. Of course she wasn't. She was still at the party, her party, basking in the glow of his detonation. He stalked to the bar, his movements jerky, uncoordinated. He grabbed a crystal tumbler and the bottle of Macallan, 25. He didn't bother with ice. He poured 3 fingers, his hand shaking so violently that the liquor splashed onto the granite. He drank it in one raw, burning gulp. He paced the immense salon. He looked at her things, the art books on the coffee table, the vases of fresh peonies she always arranged, the simple life. It was all a lie. A meticulously constructed stage set for his benefit. Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through him. He went to her study, the room he never entered, the one he assumed was filled with correspondence for her little charities. The door was locked. It had never been locked. In 10 years, nothing in his house had been locked from him. This, more than the auction, more than the headlines, felt like the ultimate transgression. "My house," he seethed. "My goddamn house." He remembered a master key, one he'd had made for every door, hidden in his own office. He retrieved it and jammed it into the lock. He threw the door open, expecting to find, he didn't know, diaries, letters. He found a command center. It was not a study. It was a trading floor. 6 glowing monitors were arranged in a semicircle on a custom desk. A dedicated Bloomberg terminal hummed in the corner. In a closet, where he assumed she kept stationery, was a rack of blinking servers and a dedicated high-speed fiber optic line. Secure phones, multiple keyboards, and stacks of data analytics reports littered every surface. He was standing in the nerve center of AH Capital. He stumbled forward, grabbing a sheet of paper from a printer tray. It was a market analysis, printed that afternoon. He scanned it, his vision tunneling. Davenport Holdings, DVPT, Q4 exposure analysis. He read the bullet points, each one a nail in his coffin. Over-leveraged in transport sector, highly vulnerable to a short. Apex bid is purely ego-driven. Primary valuation is 20% lower. Cash flow reliance on Shanghai port lease is a critical weakness. And then at the bottom, in her neat, elegant cursive, he will have to liquidate transport to cover the gala auction, initiate acquisition of T Logistics bonds at market open. He dropped the paper. He understood. She hadn't just overheard him that morning saying he'd liquidate the transport stocks. She had caused it. She had been squeezing his other assets for months, a silent predator, forcing him into a corner where liquidating that stock was his only option. She hadn't just reacted to his plan. She had written it. This wasn't revenge, this was an execution. Meanwhile, back at the Morgan Library, the atmosphere had transformed. The moment Arthur had walked out, the shocked silence erupted into a deafening roar of conversation. Amelia Hayes, who had spent a decade as a ghost, was now the only person in the room. She was no longer standing alone. A crowd had formed around her, a dense circle of the most powerful people in America. "Ms. Hayes," Gregory Shaw said, muscling his way to the front. His face, usually florid and arrogant, was alive with a new, sharp respect. "Gregory Shaw, well, goddamn, that was the single greatest corporate play I have ever seen, inside a boardroom or out. The Apex deal. You got it for a steal. I was a fool." "You were bidding on speculation, Mr. Shaw," Amelia said, her voice cool and steady. "I was bidding on the zoning variance I knew would be approved." Shaw's eyes widened. "How could you know that?" "Because my firm funded the Green Initiative for that district," Amelia replied simply. "I've been working on it for 18 months. The building was just the final piece." Shaw stared at her. "I've been trying to get a waterfront development project off the ground for 2 years. Arthur was in on it. But, frankly, Miss Hayes, I'd rather partner with you. Would you be open to a meeting?" "Have your people call my people," she said, a line she had dreamed of saying for years. Before he could reply, Victoria Sterling slithered in, her Givenchy dress shimmering. Her face was a brilliant mask of forced pleasantry, her eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and desperate opportunism. "Amelia, darling," Victoria purred. "My goodness, it seems I profoundly misjudged. What a secret. And what you did, donating the charter, was simply inspired. So charitable, so clever. We must have lunch. My media group, Sterling Media. Perhaps we could do an exclusive profile. The woman who tamed Wall Street." Amelia looked at the woman who had called her decoration not 2 hours earlier. "Thank you, Victoria. That's a kind offer. I'll have my team check my schedule. Though I'm not sure your audience is a fit for AH Capital's core business of logistics and biotech." It was a perfect, velvet-gloved dismissal. Victoria's smile twitched, but she nodded and slunk away, already calculating a new angle of attack. The Minister of Finance, Charles Kensington, circled back, his demeanour entirely changed. He was no longer a politician making small talk with a benefactor's wife. He was a statesman approaching a peer. "Ms. Hayes," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "I was not exaggerating. Your firm's work in green hydrogen is revolutionary. The administration is looking for private partners for the new federal energy initiative. Your name, AH Capital that is, was already on our shortlist. I had no idea. Well, my point is, I'd like to set a formal meeting in Washington. Next week, are you available?" "I would be honored, Mr. Minister," Amelia said. "My chief analyst will coordinate with your office tomorrow." She stood there for another hour, not as a wife, not as a socialite, but as a CEO. She took meetings. She accepted business cards. She shook hands. She was no longer a reflection of Arthur's power. She was her own center of gravity, and she could feel the entire, glittering, ruthless world of New York finance beginning to tilt, ever so slightly, on its axis to orbit her. At 1:30 a.m. she finally left the gala. She did not look for Thomas. A sleek, black Maybach S-Class, one Arthur had never seen, one that was registered to AH Capital, pulled up to the curb. Her own driver, a private security specialist, opened the door. The ride to the penthouse was quiet. She watched the same city lights Arthur had, but to her, they were not a kingdom. They were a portfolio. She rode the private elevator up, her heart beating a slow, steady, powerful rhythm. She was not afraid. She was prepared. She had run this simulation 1,000 times. She entered the apartment. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the silence. He was there. He was standing in the middle of the grand salon, silhouetted against the city. The room stank of stale whiskey. He was disheveled, his tie ripped off, his tuxedo jacket crumpled on the floor. In his hand, he was clutching the exposure analysis report from her office. "You," he snarled. The sound was guttural, animalistic. The Titan was gone. This was just a man, cornered and bleeding. "You thieving bitch." Amelia was perfectly still. She slowly, deliberately, reached up and unclasped the Cartier sapphire necklace. The weight of it fell away. This whole time," he was shaking, pointing the crumpled paper at her. "This wasn't investing. You were attacking me, my company, my life." "Attacking? No, Arthur. That's your word," she said, her voice as clear and cold as the marble floor. She walked to the granite table and set the heavy necklace down. It landed with a loud, definitive click. "I was competing. It's the blood sport you said I wouldn't understand. Or did I misremember? The Apex building, the K Biotech. You knew I wanted those," he roared, lunging toward her, then stopping, as if held by an invisible chain. "You wanted them, yes," she said, not flinching. "But you were inefficient. You were bidding on ego, not on value. I was bidding on a 5-year plan. My investors thank you for all the press, by the way. It raised the profile of my acquisitions significantly. You humiliated me," he screamed, his face purple, "in front of everyone, my rivals, my friends. I am your husband." "My husband?" Amelia's voice dropped, and the quiet in it was more dangerous than his roar. "When exactly was I your wife, Arthur? Was I your wife when you told me to not worry my pretty head? When you sent me away to mingle like a poodle at your events? Was I your wife when you bought Victoria Sterling that Bentley? Or was I your wife when you flew your ballet protégé to Paris on the company jet?" He froze. He had no answer. He had never dreamed she knew the specifics. He thought she was too simple, too nice to notice. "You didn't want a wife," she said, walking past him, her head held high. "You wanted a decoration, a simple thing to hang on your arm and prove you had taste. The problem, Arthur, is that you acquired an asset without doing your due diligence. You never bothered to check its true value." He was desperate, his rage collapsing into a pathetic, wheezing panic. "What now? What do you want? You're going to divorce me? Take half, is that it? You want half of what's mine?" Amelia stopped at the entrance to the bedroom hallway. She turned, her face silhouetted by the moonlight. "Half," she said. And for the first time that night, she laughed. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a sharp, chilling, terrifying sound. "Oh, Arthur, darling, you still don't get it, do you?" She took a step toward him. He instinctively recoiled. "I don't want half of your company. I don't want your permission to leave. I don't want anything from you." "Then what is this?" he pleaded. "What do you want?" Amelia looked at him, her eyes as cold and clear and deep as the sapphires she'd left on the table. "I'm not taking half, Arthur," she said, her voice a blade. "I'm taking all of it. Your company is leveraged to the hilt. Your transport division is bleeding. Your primary partners are already sending me proposals. And the market opens in 9 hours. The ghost you've been so worried about. She's not a hedge fund brat. She's your wife. And this," she said, pausing to let the words land with the weight of a gavel, "is a hostile takeover." She turned, walked into the master suite, and the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the only sound in the penthouse. It was the sound of the king being dethroned. Arthur Davenport was left alone in the vast, dark room, the dawning, soul-crushing realization finally hitting him. The party wasn't the end. It was the opening bell. He wasn't just humiliated. He was ruined. The brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. But sometimes, the person forced to live in that shadow is the one with the most brilliant light of all. Amelia didn't just reclaim her name. She redefined her worth, proving that being underestimated is the ultimate strategic advantage. Her story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. What did you think of Amelia's incredible power move? Was Arthur's public humiliation deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and a stunning transformation, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story where the underdog finally wins. And for more dramatic, real-life stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss an update.